There's a specific, uncomfortable clarity available once you stop asking whether someone loves you and start asking instead whether they choose you consistently in the ordinary, unglamorous ways that actually build a life together. Love, as this piece will describe throughout, is not actually the deciding factor in whether you're treated as someone irreplaceable or someone convenient. Choice is, and the evidence for which one you're receiving is almost never found in what someone says. It's found in what they consistently do over time, when nothing dramatic is forcing their hand one way or the other. This piece is about learning to read that evidence clearly, honestly, and without the generous, hopeful interpretation that so often clouds it, so that you can stop wondering which category you occupy and start building a life around people who never leave you wondering at all. What the distinction actually means. Being the one means being someone's clear, consistent priority, chosen not just when it's easy or convenient, but through the ordinary friction of daily life, through moments of inconvenience, through situations where choosing you costs something. It means being integrated into someone's plans, their vocabulary, their sense of their own future, in ways that don't waver based on mood or circumstance. It means the relationship functions as a genuine partnership, not something held at arm's length, available when wanted and set aside when it isn't. Being the option means something different, and often something much harder to name clearly, because it rarely announces itself directly. It looks like inconsistency dressed up as busyness. It looks like being present in someone's life without being integrated into their plans. It looks like affection that arrives on their schedule in their terms, without ever quite building into the kind of sustained, forward-moving commitment that being the one actually requires. Being the option often still involves real, genuine warmth, real chemistry, real moments that feel meaningful, which is exactly what makes it so difficult to recognize for what it actually is. This distinction matters enormously because so much unnecessary suffering comes from treating these two categories as though they're simply matters of degree, as though enough patience or enough love could eventually convert one into the other. They aren't degrees of the same thing. They are fundamentally different categories, determined not by the strength of feeling involved but by the consistency of choice behind it, and confusing the two keeps people invested, often for years, in relationships that were never actually going to become what they were hoping for. Why this isn't about how much someone feels. It's worth being direct about something that complicates this entire subject. Someone can genuinely, intensely feel something for you and still, through their own consistent pattern of behavior, treat you as an option rather than as the one. This isn't hypocrisy, and it isn't necessarily deception. It reflects the simple, sometimes painful truth that feeling and choosing are not the same capacity, and a person can possess real depth of feeling while still failing, repeatedly, to translate that feeling into the sustained, consistent choosing that being someone's priority actually requires. This matters because it's tempting, especially for someone in the option position, to use evidence of genuine feeling as proof that the relationship is actually more than it appears, that with enough patience, the feeling will eventually convert into the consistent choice it seems to be pointing toward. But feeling, on its own, has never been a reliable predictor of choice. Plenty of people feel a great deal for someone they never actually choose consistently, for reasons that live entirely inside their own capacity and their own fear, reasons that have little to do with the specific person they're failing to fully choose. Understanding this distinction protects you from an exhausting, often years-long project of waiting for genuine feeling to eventually produce genuine choice, a conversion that in many cases was never actually coming, regardless of how real and how deep the underlying feeling happened to be. General patterns worth understanding, held loosely. It's useful to understand, in general terms, some patterns commonly associated with being treated as an option, drawn from broader relational psychology rather than confident claims about any one specific person. These patterns are worth holding loosely, as things to notice rather than as a checklist that definitively proves anything about your own particular situation, because context always matters and no single behavior, viewed in isolation, tells the whole story. Being treated as an option often involves a specific kind of inconsistency, warmth, and attentiveness during moments of low personal cost, paired with sudden unavailability or distance whenever the relationship would require some genuine sacrifice or accommodation. It often involves being kept somewhat separate from other important parts of someone's life, introduced late or never to family and close friends, excluded from significant events, treated as a compartment rather than as someone integrated into the broader architecture of their life. It often involves plans that remain vague and non-committal, affection that arrives without ever building toward anything more structured or sustained. None of these patterns on their own definitively proves anything, and it's worth resisting the urge to diagnose your own situation based on any single item from this list in isolation. What matters more is the overall pattern, sustained over real time, and even then, the most reliable evidence available to you isn't any external framework at all. It's your own honest, accumulated experience of how consistently you're actually being chosen in the small, ordinary ways that matter most. Why you can't argue your way into being the one. One of the more painful realizations available in this entire subject is that being the one is not something you can earn through sufficient patience, sufficient understanding, or sufficient effort on your own part. It's not a status you can argue, persuade, or love someone into granting you. This runs directly against a common, deeply held belief, the idea that if you're simply good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, someone's inconsistency will eventually resolve into the consistent choosing you've been hoping for. This belief, however understandable, tends to keep people invested in the option position for far longer than actually serves them, because it locates the solution entirely within their own continued effort, when the actual determining factor lies almost entirely in the other person's own internal capacity and their own willingness to choose consistently. No amount of your own patience can produce someone else's readiness to fully choose you. That readiness, when it exists, tends to show up relatively early and relatively clearly, not after years of additional patience finally wears down some invisible resistance. Releasing the belief that you can argue or earn your way into being the one is genuinely difficult, but it's also genuinely freeing, because it redirects your energy away from an exhausting, often fruitless campaign of proving your worth, and toward the more productive question of whether the person in front of you is already demonstrating, through consistent action, the kind of choosing that being the one actually requires, what being the one actually requires. It's worth painting a clear, concrete picture of what being the one actually looks like in practice, because it's easy to know you're not receiving it without having a fully articulated sense of what you're actually looking for instead. Being the one looks like consistency that doesn't require your ongoing vigilance to maintain, someone whose behavior toward you doesn't fluctuate dramatically based on their mood or the ease of the moment. It looks like integration being woven into someone's actual life, their plans, their introductions to the people who matter to them, rather than being kept in a separate, more private compartment. It looks like initiative shared roughly equally, rather than falling almost entirely on you to maintain contact, plan time together, or carry the emotional labor of keeping the connection alive. It looks like someone actively building toward a shared future with you, in language and in action, rather than remaining permanently vague about where things are headed or deflecting any conversation about the relationship's actual direction. It looks like feeling secure in the relationship's basic stability, rather than needing to constantly monitor for signs that things might be slipping. This is a demanding standard, and it's worth being honest that it is, in fact, exactly the standard worth holding, because it reflects what genuine, sustainable partnership actually requires. Settling for less, extending patience indefinitely in hopes that less will eventually become more, tends to produce exactly the kind of chronic uncertainty and exhaustion that keeps people stuck in the option position for far longer than actually serves them. Trusting evidence over hope. One of the more difficult skills available in this entire subject is learning to weight actual, accumulated evidence more heavily than hope, especially hope built on isolated moments of genuine warmth or connection that don't reflect the broader, more consistent pattern of someone's behavior. Hope is a powerful, seductive force, capable of reframing even significant inconsistency as a temporary phase, a misunderstanding, a challenge that will eventually resolve itself given enough patience and enough time. Trusting evidence over hope means asking honestly, at regular intervals, what the actual pattern of someone's behavior has been over a meaningful period of time, not just in the most recent, most emotionally charged moment, but across the fuller sweep of the relationship as it's actually unfolded. It means being willing to notice when a pattern of inconsistency has repeated itself multiple times, rather than treating each individual instance as an isolated exception deserving of fresh hope and fresh patience. This shift from hope-driven interpretation to evidence-driven assessment is genuinely difficult, especially for people whose natural instinct is generous and forgiving. But it's also one of the most protective skills available, because it allows you to see a relationship's actual trajectory clearly, rather than continuing to interpret each new instance of inconsistency through the same hopeful lens that has already, repeatedly, proven unreliable. The cost of staying in the option position. It's worth naming directly and honestly what staying in the option position actually costs over time, because this cost is easy to underestimate when it's distributed across many individual days rather than experienced all at once. Staying in this position costs you time, sometimes years, that could have been spent building something with someone genuinely capable and willing to choose you consistently. It costs you emotional energy, spent managing uncertainty, interpreting ambiguous signals, and hoping for a resolution that doesn't reliably arrive. It costs you a piece of your own self-trust, as the accumulated experience of being treated inconsistently gradually erodes your confidence in your own read of situations and your own sense of what you deserve. This cost compounds the longer the option position continues, making it progressively harder to recognize and step away from, precisely because so much has already been invested that walking away can feel like abandoning a project rather than protecting yourself from continued depletion. Understanding this cost clearly, rather than minimizing it in favor of continued hope, is an important part of building the clarity necessary to make a genuinely informed decision about whether to continue investing in a relationship that has, so far, kept you in this particular position. Why this isn't about your worth. It's worth stating directly and clearly something that this entire subject can easily obscure. Being treated as an option rather than as the one is never actually a verdict on your worth, however much it might feel that way in the moment. This treatment reflects the other person's own capacity, their own readiness, their own internal patterns, not any deficiency in you. A person capable of genuinely choosing someone consistently will do so with almost anyone who meets their basic compatibility, and a person not yet capable of that consistent choosing will fail to offer it regardless of how genuinely wonderful, patient, or deserving the person in front of them happens to be. This distinction matters because so much unnecessary suffering in this position comes from internalizing inconsistent treatment as evidence of some personal insufficiency, searching for the specific flaw that explains why you haven't been chosen more fully, when the actual explanation lives almost entirely inside the other person's own capacity rather than in anything about you specifically. Releasing this internalized self-blame is one of the more important pieces of clarity available from fully understanding the distinction this piece has been describing throughout. Your worth remains completely intact regardless of which category any specific person places you in. What varies is not your value but their own readiness and capacity to fully choose someone, a readiness and capacity that exists or doesn't exist independently of anything about you. What to do with the clarity once you have it. Once you've honestly assessed the evidence and recognized that you're being treated as an option rather than as the one, it's worth being direct about what genuinely productive next steps actually look like, because clarity alone doesn't automatically resolve the situation without some accompanying action. This might mean having a direct, honest conversation about what you've observed and what you need going forward, giving the other person a clear opportunity to respond with either genuine, sustained change or continued inconsistency that confirms the pattern you've already recognized. It might mean setting a clear, internal timeline for how long you're willing to continue in this uncertain position before making a more definitive decision about the relationship's future. It might mean, depending on how entrenched and how long-standing the pattern has been, simply stepping back from the relationship entirely, recognizing that the evidence has already spoken clearly enough that further waiting isn't likely to produce a meaningfully different outcome. Whatever specific action feels right for your own situation, the important thing is moving from passive hoping to active decision-making, ensuring that your own continued investment reflects a deliberate choice rather than simply an inertia born of hope that hasn't yet been tested against the actual, accumulated evidence available to you. Recognizing your own value independent of their categorization. It's worth building, deliberately, a sense of your own value that doesn't depend on any specific person's categorization of you, whether as the one, the option, or anything in between. This independent sense of worth is one of the most protective resources available to you throughout this entire process, because it means your own self-regard doesn't rise and fall based on how consistently or inconsistently any particular person chooses to treat you. Building this independent sense of worth means actively cultivating relationships, achievements, and sources of meaning that have nothing to do with this specific dynamic, ensuring that your overall sense of yourself remains grounded in a broader, more stable foundation than any single relationship could ever fully determine. It means practicing deliberately the recognition that your value existed before this relationship began and will continue to exist regardless of how it ultimately resolves. This independent sense of worth doesn't mean pretending the situation doesn't hurt or that being treated as an option is somehow acceptable simply because your worth remains intact regardless. It means holding both truths simultaneously. The situation is genuinely painful and your worth remains completely unaffected by it, two things that can coexist without one canceling out the other. What you deserve, stated plainly. It's worth stating directly and without hedging exactly what you deserve from any relationship you invest significant time and energy into, because holding this standard clearly protects you from settling for less simply because less has become familiar. You deserve to be someone's clear priority, not their convenient option, chosen consistently rather than intermittently. You deserve integration into someone's actual life, not a compartmentalized, separate role kept apart from the people and activities that matter most to them. You deserve initiative shared roughly equally, rather than carrying the disproportionate burden of maintaining the relationship's continued existence largely on your own. You deserve clarity about where a relationship is headed, rather than permanent vagueness that never quite resolves into anything more definite. You deserve to feel secure in a relationship's basic stability, rather than constantly monitoring for signs that things might be slipping away. None of this is too much to ask. It's simply what genuine partnership actually requires, and holding this standard clearly, rather than negotiating it down in hopes of eventually receiving it anyway, protects you from continuing to invest in dynamics that were never actually going to meet it. Hold this standard without apology, understanding that wanting to be genuinely, consistently chosen is not an excessive demand, but a basic, reasonable expectation for any relationship you're investing real time and energy into building. Building your own certainty. Beyond waiting for someone else to provide certainty about where you stand, it's worth building your own internal certainty, grounded not in what anyone else eventually decides, but in your own clear understanding of what you need and what you're willing to accept. This internal certainty doesn't depend on correctly predicting anyone else's eventual behavior. It depends entirely on your own considered values, your own honest assessment of the evidence available to you, and your own willingness to act on that assessment rather than continuing to wait indefinitely for external clarity that may never fully arrive. Building this certainty means getting explicit, even just for yourself, about what specifically you're looking for, what evidence would actually satisfy you that you're being treated as the one rather than as an option, and what you're prepared to do if that evidence continues to be absent over a meaningful period of time. Having this clarity articulated even privately gives you a stable foundation to return to whenever uncertainty or hope threatens to pull you back into passive waiting rather than active, considered decision-making. This internal certainty is more valuable and more reliable than anything external could ever provide, because it remains fully within your own control, regardless of anything else that happens in the relationship you're evaluating. The freedom of stepping out of the option position. There is a specific, significant freedom available once you decide, clearly and deliberately, to stop occupying the option position in any relationship where that's what you're actually being offered. This freedom doesn't depend on the other person's response to your decision. It's available to you the moment you fully internalize that you deserve consistent, genuine choosing, and that you're no longer willing to accept anything less regardless of how much genuine warmth or connection might also be present within an otherwise inconsistent dynamic. This freedom often feels, initially, uncomfortable, even frightening, especially if the relationship in question has occupied significant emotional space for a long time. But it also offers real relief, releasing you from the exhausting project of managing uncertainty, interpreting ambiguous signals, and hoping for a resolution that hasn't reliably arrived despite significant time and effort already invested. Stepping out of this position, whatever specific form that stepping out takes, redirects your energy toward relationships and pursuits genuinely capable of offering the consistent choosing you deserve. Trust that this freedom, uncomfortable as its initial stages might feel, is worth building toward deliberately, understanding that continuing indefinitely in the option position, hoping for eventual conversion into something more, tends to cost far more than the discomfort of finally, clearly, stepping away from it. What genuine change would actually require? If someone currently treating you as an option does eventually attempt to demonstrate genuine change, it's worth having a clear, considered standard ready for what that change would actually need to include in order to be reasonably believed, rather than being persuaded prematurely by a single compelling gesture that hasn't yet had the chance to prove its self-sustainable. Genuine change tends to look like sustained, consistent behavior over a meaningful period of time, not a single dramatic effort that coincides suspiciously with the moment they sense they might be losing access to you. This standard might include requiring a demonstrated shift in how they integrate you into their broader life, actual introductions to important people, actual inclusion in significant plans, rather than simply increased communication or affection in the short term. It might include requiring clarity about the relationship's direction that has previously been avoided, offered without your having to extract it through repeated, exhausting conversations. It might include a track record, sustained over weeks or months rather than days, of consistent initiative and consistent presence, evidence that the change reflects an actual internal shift rather than a temporary, urgency-driven adjustment. Holding this clear standard protects you from being swept along by hope or urgency in a single moment, ensuring that any reconsideration of the relationship's terms is grounded in solid, demonstrated evidence rather than in wishful interpretation of a gesture that hasn't yet proven durable. The confusion of mixed signals. One of the more disorienting aspects of being in the option position is the presence of genuine, real moments of connection and warmth interspersed with the broader pattern of inconsistency. Moments that make the overall situation harder to read clearly than a simpler, more obviously negative dynamic would be. This mixture can feel genuinely confusing, making it harder to trust your own assessment, because it doesn't fit neatly into either the story of someone who clearly doesn't care or the story of someone who has clearly, reliably chosen you. It's worth naming this confusion directly rather than pretending clarity is simpler than it actually feels in the moment. Mixed signals are genuinely disorienting, and it's reasonable to feel unsettled by them even while still holding firmly to an honest assessment of the broader pattern they're embedded within. When mixed signals arise, it can help to return to the broader, accumulated pattern rather than trying to resolve the confusion of each individual moment in isolation. Individual moments, taken one at a time, will often remain genuinely ambiguous. The overall pattern, evaluated honestly over a meaningful stretch of time, is what actually matters most. Why waiting doesn't usually work. It's worth addressing directly a strategy that many people in the option position eventually try, whether consciously or not, simply waiting longer in hopes that additional time alone will eventually produce the consistent choosing they've been hoping for. This strategy rarely works as intended for a simple structural reason. If someone hasn't demonstrated consistent choosing within a relationship's earlier, easier stages, additional time alone doesn't typically produce that capacity where it was previously absent. What tends to happen instead is simply more time spent in the same unsatisfying position, without the underlying dynamic actually shifting toward anything more consistent or secure. This isn't true in every single case, and genuine, sustained change is possible, as this piece has already acknowledged. But it's worth being honest that waiting, on its own, without any accompanying shift in the other person's actual behavior, is rarely the mechanism that produces genuine transformation. What tends to produce genuine transformation, when it happens at all, is the other person's own internal readiness and willingness to do real work, not simply the accumulation of additional patient waiting on your part. Understanding this helps clarify why continuing to wait passively, without any clear timeline or any clear standard for what would actually need to change, often isn't the most productive path forward, however much it might feel in the moment like the safer or more patient choice. The grief of recognizing this pattern. It's worth acknowledging honestly that recognizing you've been treated as an option, however clarifying this recognition ultimately is, often carries real grief alongside it. You may grieve the time already invested, the version of the relationship you'd hoped was still possible, the future you may have quietly imagined even while some part of you suspected it wasn't actually being built toward with the consistency it required. This grief deserves genuine space, rather than being minimized or rushed past in favor of a purely empowered, clarity-focused narrative alone. Give yourself permission to feel this grief fully, understanding that recognizing an accurate pattern and grieving what it means are not contradictory processes, but complementary parts of the same overall healing. You can hold real clarity about what this relationship has actually been, and real sadness about what it isn't, simultaneously, without needing to resolve the tension between them prematurely in favor of either pure relief or pure devastation. This grief, honored rather than avoided, tends to move through you more completely than grief that gets bypassed in favor of an artificially cheerful story about empowerment alone. Both experiences, the clarity and the grief, are genuine parts of this process, and both deserve your full attention as you move through it. What this pattern reveals and what it doesn't. It's worth being precise about what recognizing this pattern actually reveals and what it doesn't. It reveals something real and specific about the other person's current capacity and current readiness for the kind of consistent choosing genuine partnership requires. It does not reveal anything definitive about their character as a whole, their capacity for love in some general, abstract sense, or their worth as a human being. People are capable of real growth, and the same person who currently lacks the capacity for consistent choosing might, at some future point, develop it, though that development, as this piece has already discussed, is never something you can produce through your own continued patience alone. What this pattern also doesn't reveal is anything negative about you. It reveals only that this specific person, at this specific point in their own development, hasn't yet demonstrated the consistent choosing that being the one actually requires. This distinction matters because it protects you from either villainizing the other person entirely or from internalizing their limitation as evidence of your own insufficiency, neither of which accurately reflects what this pattern actually indicates. Holding this precise, accurate understanding, rather than an oversimplified version in either direction, tends to support more genuine, complete healing than a story that requires either party to be fully at fault or fully innocent. A reflection on self-respect in the waiting. If you do decide, for whatever reason, that some continued waiting still feels right for your own particular situation, it's worth ensuring that this waiting happens with genuine self-respect intact, rather than through continued self-abandonment disguised as patience. This means continuing to invest in your own life, your own goals, and your own other relationships throughout any waiting period, rather than putting your entire life on hold, contingent on an uncertain outcome you can't control or predict. It means setting a clear internal timeline, rather than waiting indefinitely without any boundary around how long this uncertain position is something you're willing to continue occupying. It means noticing honestly whether the waiting is producing any genuine, meaningful evidence of change, or whether it's simply the accumulation of more time spent in the same unsatisfying pattern that originally prompted your concern. Waiting held this way with genuine boundaries and continued investment in your own broader life is different from the more depleting, self-abandoning waiting that keeps people stuck indefinitely in the option position. If you choose to wait, choose it deliberately and with real self-respect rather than by default, simply because leaving feels harder than continuing to hope. The difference between settling and genuine patience. It's worth drawing a clear distinction between settling for less than you deserve and genuine, appropriate patience during the reasonable, early stages of getting to know someone new. Early relationships genuinely require some patience, some willingness to allow trust and commitment to build gradually rather than expecting full, complete choosing from the very first weeks or months. This early patience is healthy and appropriate, reflecting an understanding that genuine consistency takes some time to demonstrate reliably. Settling is different. Settling means continuing to extend this same patience well past the point where the relationship has had ample time to demonstrate its actual trajectory, continuing to interpret ongoing inconsistency as simply an extension of early-stage uncertainty long after that framing has stopped accurately describing what's actually happening. The line between these two isn't always perfectly clear, but it's worth checking in with yourself honestly and periodically about which one actually describes your current situation, rather than assuming, by default, that continued patience is always the more virtuous or more appropriate choice. If a relationship has had a genuinely reasonable amount of time, typically measured in months rather than weeks, without demonstrating the kind of consistent choosing this piece has described throughout, it's worth taking that absence seriously as meaningful information, rather than continuing to extend the same early-stage patience indefinitely, regardless of how much time has actually already passed. As said, what other people have learned from this same recognition. It's worth offering some general, broadly shared wisdom drawn from the common experience of people who have navigated this same recognition, insight drawn from common threads rather than any single specific case. Many people looking back after significant time has passed report that the actual moment of clear recognition, however uncomfortable, felt like a genuine relief compared to the prolonged uncertainty that preceded it. The constant analyzing, hoping, and interpreting that had characterized the earlier stages of trying to determine which category they actually occupied. Many also report that acting on this recognition, whether through a direct conversation, a clear internal timeline, or eventually stepping back from the relationship entirely, proved considerably less difficult in practice than the anticipation of doing so had suggested it would be. The anticipation of clarity, in other words, often proves harder to bear than clarity itself, once it's actually reached and acted upon. This broader shared pattern offers a kind of general reassurance worth holding onto if you're currently in the process of reaching this same recognition. The discomfort of uncertainty you're currently navigating is often harder than whatever comes after you finally act on the clarity you've built, and trusting this broader pattern can offer real encouragement during the more difficult, uncertain stretches of this specific process. Practical signs worth paying attention to. It's worth offering something more concrete here, a practical set of signs worth paying attention to as you evaluate your own situation, understanding that no single sign definitively proves anything on its own, but that an accumulated pattern across several of them offers meaningful, reliable information. Notice whether you're introduced to the people who matter most in someone's life, and whether that introduction happens within a reasonable time frame rather than being indefinitely postponed. Notice whether plans made together tend to be specific and followed through on, or whether they remain persistently vague and easily canceled. Notice who initiates contact more often, and whether that balance feels roughly equal or heavily skewed in one direction. Notice whether conversations about the relationship's direction are met with openness and clarity, or with deflection and vagueness that never quite resolves. Notice, too, whether you feel generally secure in the relationship's stability, or whether you find yourself frequently uncertain about where you actually stand. These practical signs, considered together rather than in isolation, offer a more reliable picture than any single moment or any single conversation could provide on its own, helping you build the kind of accumulated, evidence-based clarity this piece has been encouraging throughout. The body's response to chronic uncertainty. It's worth attending directly to the physical experience of prolonged uncertainty about which category you occupy in a relationship, because the body often processes this kind of chronic ambiguity in ways worth paying close attention to. Chronic uncertainty tends to produce a specific kind of low-grade, ongoing tension, a nervous system that remains slightly activated, always monitoring for signs of where things actually stand, rarely getting the chance to fully settle because the underlying situation itself remains unresolved. This tension is easy to normalize over time, especially if it's been present for a long period, but it carries a real physical cost worth acknowledging directly. If you notice honestly that your body carries tension specifically related to this relationship, difficulty sleeping, a persistent low-grade anxiety, a physical bracing that seems tied to the uncertainty of your position, this is meaningful information, worth weighing alongside everything else this piece has described. Your body often registers the truth of a situation before your conscious mind has fully articulated it, and paying attention to these physical signals can offer valuable, additional evidence as you work to build an honest, accurate assessment of your own circumstances. Trust this physical information as part of the broader picture, understanding that chronic bodily tension tied to a specific relationship is not something to simply push through indefinitely in the name of patience or hope, but genuine, valuable data worth incorporating into your overall understanding of what this relationship is actually costing you. Redefining what success looks like in this process. It's worth addressing directly how you define success as you work through this recognition, because an unspoken, unexamined definition of success, something like successfully convincing someone to finally choose you consistently, sets you up for continued disappointment regardless of how well you're actually doing in terms of your own clarity and self-respect. Redefining success means measuring it instead by your own honest assessment, your own willingness to act on that assessment, and your own commitment to accepting nothing less than genuine, consistent choosing, regardless of whether that consistent choosing ultimately comes from this specific person or from someone else entirely. This redefinition is genuinely freeing, because it means success becomes something entirely within your control, achievable regardless of what any specific person ultimately decides to offer you. You succeed by this redefined standard every time you assess your situation honestly, every time you act in alignment with your own genuine needs, rather than continuing to wait indefinitely out of fear or habit, every time you protect your own worth regardless of how consistently or inconsistently you're currently being treated. Adopt this redefined standard deliberately, checking in with yourself periodically about how you're doing according to this more accurate, more achievable measure, rather than continuing to measure your progress against whether a specific person has finally, definitively chosen you. What this recognition means for future relationships. Everything described throughout this piece changes, in practical and valuable ways, how you'll approach relationships going forward. You'll bring a sharper, more immediate instinct for recognizing the early signs of the option position, rather than waiting, as you may have this time, until significant time and investment have already accumulated before addressing it clearly. You'll bring a clearer, more considered sense of what genuine, consistent choosing actually requires, rather than being persuaded prematurely by isolated moments of warmth that don't reflect the broader pattern. You'll also bring a stronger commitment to your own worth, independent of any single relationship's outcome, understanding now, through direct experience, exactly how costly it is to remain indefinitely in a position of uncertainty, hoping for a conversion that may never actually arrive. This wisdom, hard-won through real experience, will protect you from investing as deeply, as quickly, in future dynamics that show the early signs of the same pattern, ensuring that your considerable capacity for love and patience gets directed toward relationships genuinely capable of matching it with consistent, reciprocal choosing. The support system around you now. Moving through this process of honest recognition is considerably easier when you're not doing it entirely alone, and it's worth considering directly the role your support system plays in helping you build and sustain this kind of clarity. Friends and family who can offer honest, grounded reflection, rather than automatically validating whatever hopeful interpretation feels most comfortable in the moment, help you stay anchored to an accurate assessment of your situation, rather than drifting back toward wishful thinking whenever doubt or loneliness make that wishful thinking feel more appealing. It's worth being intentional, if possible, about who you process this situation with, seeking out people capable of offering honest, compassionate perspective, rather than either uncritical validation of every hope you might express or harsh judgment that fails to honor the genuine difficulty of this recognition. This kind of balanced, honest support helps you build and sustain the clarity this piece has been describing throughout, protecting you from the isolation that can otherwise make navigating this recognition considerably harder than it needs to be. Building or maintaining this kind of support system is one of the more practical, valuable steps available to you as you continue working through this process, ensuring that your own honest assessment doesn't get quietly undermined by well-intentioned but ultimately unhelpful reassurance from people who mean well but aren't actually helping you see your situation clearly. A word on patience with your own process. It's worth acknowledging that everything described throughout this piece, the recognition, the grief, the eventual action, and the healing that follows, unfolds according to its own timeline, different for every person, shaped by countless individual factors that have little to do with how thoroughly you understand any of the concepts this piece has offered. Some people move through this process relatively quickly, reaching clarity and acting on it within a matter of weeks. Others take considerably longer, moving through periods of continued hope, continued doubt, and continued difficulty, fully accepting what the evidence has already made clear. Be patient with your own particular timeline, resisting any urge to measure your progress against some imagined standard of how quickly this process is supposed to unfold. What matters is not speed but direction, the gradual, consistent movement toward greater clarity and self-respect, even when that movement feels uneven or interrupted by more difficult days along the way. Trust that direction even during the moments it's hardest to feel, understanding that the destination, a clear, self-respecting understanding of your own worth and your own standards, remains fully available to you regardless of how long the specific journey toward it takes in your own particular case. What genuine reciprocity would actually feel like. It's worth spending time imagining, clearly and specifically, what genuine reciprocity would actually feel like in practice, so that you have a concrete, embodied sense of what you're actually working toward, rather than only an abstract understanding of what you're trying to avoid. Genuine reciprocity feels like relief, a settling in your body that comes from no longer needing to monitor, interpret, or manage uncertainty about where you stand. It feels like ease, conversations about the relationship's direction happening naturally and openly, rather than requiring extraction through repeated, exhausting effort on your part. It feels like being fully seen and fully integrated, introduced without hesitation, included in plans without needing to ask, chosen consistently across the full range of circumstances a relationship actually presents, not just during the easier, more convenient moments. This is worth holding as a genuine, concrete goal, something achievable and real, rather than an idealized fantasy unlikely to actually exist. Trust that this kind of reciprocity is available to you, built out of everything this entire process has already taught you about what to look for and what to protect yourself from settling for instead. The practical shape of moving forward. It's worth translating everything this piece has described into something more concrete, the actual practical shape of moving forward from wherever you currently stand in this process. It looks like conducting an honest, evidence-based review of the actual pattern of your current or recent relationship, rather than relying on isolated memories of the most emotionally charged or hopeful moments. It looks like articulating clearly, perhaps even in writing, what specific evidence would actually satisfy you that you're being treated as the one rather than as an option, and holding that standard consistently rather than continually renegotiating it downward. It looks like having an honest, direct conversation if that feels appropriate, giving the other person a genuine, clear opportunity to respond with either sustained change or continued inconsistency that confirms what you've already observed. It looks like setting a realistic internal timeline if you decide some continued observation still makes sense, rather than waiting indefinitely without any boundary around how long this uncertain position remains acceptable. And it looks like being prepared, genuinely and practically, to step back from the relationship if the evidence continues to point toward the option position rather than toward the consistent choosing you deserve. These practical steps, small and specific as they are, translate the broader understanding this piece has offered into something you can actually act on, moving you from passive analysis toward active, considered decision-making about your own life and your own worth. What remains true regardless of the outcome. As this piece moves toward its conclusion, it's worth naming clearly what remains true regardless of how any specific situation ultimately resolves. Your worth remains completely intact, unaffected by whether any particular person ultimately chooses to treat you as the one or continues treating you as an option. Your right to hold a clear, reasonable standard for what genuine partnership requires remains valid, regardless of whether that standard is ever fully met by any specific person you've invested in. Your capacity for genuine love and genuine partnership remains real and undiminished, ready to be offered fully to someone actually capable of matching it with the consistent choosing it deserves. These truths don't depend on any specific outcome with any specific relationship. They remain solid and reliable regardless of whatever eventually unfolds, offering you a stable foundation to return to whenever doubt, hope, or difficulty make that foundation harder to access in the moment. Closing. You deserve to be someone's clear, consistent choice, not their convenient option. This distinction, now fully understood, changes everything about how you evaluate the relationships in your life, protecting you from settling for less than genuine, sustained partnership while remaining fully open to the real, reciprocal love you actually deserve. Carry this understanding forward, complete and unshakable, into whatever comes next. What this means when you're the one who struggles with consistency. It's worth pausing to address a question that sometimes arises for readers of a piece like this. What if you recognize elements of the option-giving pattern in your own behavior toward someone else, rather than only in someone else's behavior toward you? This is worth examining honestly, without either excessive self-criticism or defensive dismissal, because genuine self-awareness about your own patterns is just as valuable as clarity about someone else's. If you notice this in yourself, it's worth asking honestly what's driving the inconsistency, whether it reflects genuine uncertainty about the specific relationship, or a broader, more long-standing pattern of difficulty with sustained commitment that shows up across multiple relationships regardless of who the other person happens to be. If it's the latter, this is valuable information worth taking seriously, potentially worth addressing through your own honest reflection or professional support, because continuing to place other people in the option position, repeatedly, across multiple relationships, causes real harm regardless of your own intentions or your own genuine feelings in the moment. This piece has primarily been written from the perspective of someone evaluating their own position within a relationship, but the underlying principles apply symmetrically. Everyone deserves to be treated as the one by the people they're building a life with, and everyone bears responsibility for examining honestly whether they're capable of offering that same consistent choosing to the people who deserve it from them. The difference between a slow start and a permanent pattern. It's worth drawing one more important distinction between a relationship that starts slowly but genuinely builds toward consistent choosing over a reasonable time frame, and a relationship where inconsistency represents a permanent, unchanging pattern regardless of how much time passes. Some relationships genuinely do start with some hesitation or uncertainty that gradually resolves as trust builds, and both people become more confident in the connection. This is different from a pattern that remains fundamentally unchanged across months or years, where the same inconsistency that characterized the relationship's early stages continues to characterize it indefinitely, regardless of how much time and effort you've invested in the meantime. Distinguishing between these two requires honest reflection on the actual trajectory of the relationship over time, not just its current state in isolation. Has the pattern of inconsistency actually improved, meaningfully and measurably, or has it simply continued, perhaps with occasional promising exceptions that don't reflect any genuine, sustained shift in the broader pattern? This honest trajectory assessment is one of the more valuable tools available to you in determining whether continued patience is likely to be rewarded with genuine change, or whether it's simply extending an already well-established, unchanging pattern indefinitely. A closing thought on choosing yourself. Everything this piece has described ultimately points toward a single, central practice: choosing yourself clearly and consistently, regardless of whether any specific other person has yet demonstrated the capacity to choose you back with equal consistency. This is, in many ways, the deepest and most important lesson available from this entire subject. You can offer yourself the same consistent choosing you're hoping to eventually receive from someone else, prioritizing your own well-being, your own worth, and your own clear standards regardless of anyone else's readiness to meet them. This self-directed choosing doesn't replace the genuine desire for reciprocal partnership, but it does provide a stable foundation that doesn't depend on anyone else's timeline or anyone else's capacity in order to remain solid and reliable. Practice this choosing deliberately, understanding that it's available to you right now, regardless of anything else currently unresolved in your life, and that building this capacity for self-directed choosing is one of the most valuable, lasting outcomes available from everything this piece has described throughout. What to say when you're ready for the direct conversation. If you decide that a direct conversation is the right next step, it's worth having some clear, considered language ready in advance, rather than needing to construct it reactively in an emotionally charged moment. This conversation doesn't need to be accusatory or dramatic. It can be simple and direct, naming the pattern you've observed, specifically and without excessive elaboration, and asking clearly what the other person's own intentions actually are, giving them genuine room to respond honestly rather than framing the conversation in a way that only invites defensiveness. Something like, "I've noticed that I'm often the one initiating plans, and I haven't been introduced to the people who matter most in your life, and I want to understand honestly where you see this relationship heading," communicates the essential concern clearly without requiring extensive justification or apology for raising it. Having this kind of clear, direct language prepared in advance protects you from either avoiding the conversation entirely out of discomfort, or having it in a way that becomes so emotionally charged that the actual substance gets lost in the process. Whatever specific words you choose, the important thing is giving the conversation the clarity and directness it deserves, ensuring that whatever response you receive, whether genuine engagement or continued deflection, offers you additional, meaningful evidence about which category you actually occupy. Evaluating the response, not just the words. Once this conversation happens, if it does, it's worth evaluating not just the specific words used in response, but the broader quality of engagement they reflect. A genuine, thoughtful response, even if it doesn't include everything you might have hoped to hear, tends to involve real reflection, real acknowledgement of the pattern you've named, and some indication of genuine consideration about what needs to change. A more deflective or defensive response, one that minimizes your concern, redirects blame back toward you, or offers vague reassurance without any specific commitment, tends to reflect a different, less promising kind of engagement. Pay attention, too, to what happens in the weeks following this conversation, regardless of how it initially went. Does the pattern actually begin to shift in observable, concrete ways, or does the conversation itself become simply another isolated moment that doesn't translate into any sustained change in behavior? This follow-through, more than the conversation itself, is where the real evidence lives, and it's worth continuing to evaluate honestly rather than treating the conversation alone as sufficient confirmation of genuine change. Closing thoughts on this entire process. As this piece moves toward its true conclusion, it's worth acknowledging directly that everything described throughout requires real courage. The courage to see a situation clearly even when clarity is uncomfortable. The courage to hold a standard even when holding it risks losing something you've invested real time and real feeling into. The courage to choose. See yourself even when that choice feels harder in the moment than continuing to hope. This courage is genuinely difficult to access, and building it, gradually and with real effort, is itself one of the most significant accomplishments available from everything this piece has described. Trust that you're capable of this courage, understanding that it develops the same way every other capacity described throughout this piece develops, through practice, through repeated small choices that eventually build into something more solid and more automatic. You are already, through the simple act of engaging seriously with this piece in your own situation, moving toward exactly the clarity and self-respect this entire process has been describing. The value of writing down your own evidence. It's worth suggesting directly as a practical tool the value of writing down the specific, concrete evidence that has led you to your current assessment of your relationship, in your own words, at a time when your thinking feels relatively clear and settled. This written record becomes a valuable resource to return to during moments when doubt, hope, or loneliness make that same clarity harder to access in the moment, offering you, in your own past words, a reminder of exactly what evidence led to your current understanding. This writing doesn't need to be elaborate. It simply needs to capture, honestly, the specific pattern you've observed, over what time frame, and what it has led you to conclude about which category you currently occupy. Having this written record available to reread whenever old hope or old doubt threatens to pull you back toward a less accurate, more wishful interpretation, offers a stable, reliable anchor that doesn't depend on your ability to reconstruct that same clarity from memory alone during a moment when your emotional state might make that reconstruction significantly harder. This is a small, practical, and genuinely useful tool, worth taking the time to create even if it feels somewhat effortful in the moment. The investment tends to pay off significantly during the more difficult stretches of this process, offering you a stable reference point built from your own clearest thinking. What happens to old hope over time? It's worth naming honestly that the old hope for a specific relationship to become what you'd once imagined it might doesn't typically disappear all at once through a single decision to release it. It tends to fade gradually through repeated practice of noticing this old hope and choosing, again and again, to redirect your attention toward the more accurate evidence-based understanding you've built throughout this process. There will likely be moments, even well into this process, when old hope resurfaces unexpectedly, triggered by a memory, a message, or simply a moment of loneliness. When this happens, it's worth treating it gently, as an old, familiar pattern rather than as new evidence that should change your accumulated understanding. Redirect your attention back to the honest, written record of evidence you've already built, using it as a stable reference point during these moments of resurfacing hope. Over time, with consistent practice, these moments do tend to become less frequent and less intense, eventually settling into something closer to background noise rather than the dominant, disorienting force they might currently feel like. Final thoughts on this journey. Everything described throughout this piece represents a journey, not a single moment of realization, but an accumulated process of honest observation, difficult acceptance, and eventual, considered action, built gradually out of real reflection and real patience with yourself along the way. This journey doesn't end neatly on a specific day, with a clear before and after. It continues, gradually, integrating more fully over time, occasionally revisited when new situations trigger old questions, but growing steadier and more automatic with each return to the clarity you've built. You are somewhere along this journey now, wherever you happen to be reading this, whether just beginning to consider this distinction for the first time or well along toward the full integration this piece has described. Wherever you are, trust that the journey is real, that the clarity and self-respect described throughout this piece are genuinely achievable, and that you are already, through the simple act of engaging with this understanding, moving steadily toward them. A note of compassion for the version of you who didn't know this yet. Before this piece fully closes, it's worth extending some direct compassion toward the version of yourself who may have spent significant time in the option position without yet having the language or framework to fully recognize it. The version who interpreted inconsistency generously, who extended patience well past the point W. Here it was actually being rewarded, who believed, understandably, that enough love or enough understanding might eventually produce the consistent choosing she was hoping for. That version of you deserves gentleness, not embarrassment, for not having known then what you know now. Nobody arrives at this kind of clarity automatically. It develops through direct experience, through the difficult, sometimes painful process of living through exactly the kind of uncertainty this piece has described, and then doing the further work of making sense of it accurately. The version of you who was still hoping, still interpreting ambiguous signals generously, was doing the best she could with the understanding available to her at the time, and she deserves credit, not criticism, for eventually finding her way to the clarity this piece has offered. Extend this compassion generously because it matters. Healing isn't just about correcting the intellectual understanding of what happened. It's also about making peace with every version of yourself who moved through this experience before that understanding was available, honoring the difficulty of not knowing what you know now. The real gift available from this recognition. Beyond everything specific this piece has described about any particular relationship, the real, lasting gift available from fully understanding this distinction is a deeper, more durable relationship with your own standards and your own worth. You now know from direct experience exactly what to look for, exactly what genuine choosing actually requires, and exactly how costly it is to settle for less while hoping it will eventually become more. This knowledge becomes a permanent resource, carried forward into every future relationship you build, protecting you from repeating a pattern you now understand clearly enough to recognize much earlier than before. This gift, hard-won through real difficulty, is worth recognizing and honoring directly, separate from whatever specific outcome eventually unfolds with any particular relationship. You are, in a real and lasting sense, wiser and more protected for having lived through this experience, equipped now with tools and self-knowledge that will serve you reliably for the rest of your life. Closing. Whatever comes next, remember this clearly. You deserve to be someone's one, not their option, chosen consistently rather than intermittently, integrated fully rather than kept separate, prioritized genuinely rather than convenient only when it's easy. This is not too much to ask. It is exactly what genuine partnership requires, and you are worth exactly this, regardless of anything else that happens next. What this distinction teaches about self-worth more broadly. Beyond its specific application to romantic relationships, everything this piece has described offers valuable insight into a broader question worth examining in every area of your life. Where else might you be accepting the option position when you deserve to be the priority? This might show up in friendships where you're consistently the one reaching out, initiating plans, and offering support without receiving comparable investment in return. It might show up at work, in situations where your contributions are consistently undervalued or overlooked despite your genuine effort and genuine skill. It might show up in family relationships, where your needs are consistently deprioritized in favor of other people's more immediate demands. The same principles this piece has applied specifically to romantic relationships apply broadly across every domain of your life. Genuine value and genuine priority tend to be demonstrated through consistent action, not through words alone, and settling for less in hopes that consistent effort will eventually be rewarded with equal investment often proves just as costly outside of romantic relatio. Friendships as within them. Consider whether the clarity you're building through this specific situation might usefully extend into other areas of your life where similar patterns of imbalance may have gone unexamined for some time. This broader application is one of the more valuable, transferable outcomes available from fully understanding the distinction this piece has been describing throughout. A final reflection on hope, rightly placed. It would be incomplete to end this piece without addressing hope directly, because everything described throughout carries some risk of curdling into pessimism or excessive caution if it's not balanced with genuine, well-founded hope about what's actually possible going forward. The distinction between being the one and being the option isn't meant to make you suspicious of every future relationship or convinced that genuine, consistent choosing is rare and unlikely to be found. It's meant to help you recognize it more accurately when it does appear, which it does regularly in people genuinely capable of the sustained commitment this piece has described throughout. Hold on to real hope that you will find, or perhaps have already found, someone capable of consistently, genuinely choosing you in all the ways this piece has described. This hope isn't naive. It's grounded in the same understanding this piece has built throughout, an understanding that makes you far more capable of recognizing genuine choosing when you encounter it, precisely because you now know so clearly what its absence looks like by comparison. Truly closing words. You are worth being chosen fully, consistently, and without ambiguity. Carry this understanding forward, complete and unshakable, into a future built on real clarity, real discernment, and a fully restored sense of exactly what you deserve, regardless of anything else that happens next. A brief word on self-care during this process. As you continue moving through everything described throughout this piece, it's worth naming a few concrete forms of self-care that tend to support this kind of clarity building most effectively, not as a prescriptive checklist, but as gentle suggestions worth considering. Physical movement, even simple daily walks, helps process the nervous system activation that often accompanies this kind of significant emotional work, giving your body a way to metabolize the stress and uncertainty that constant relationship analysis can otherwise leave unresolved. Journaling, specifically writing out the evidence and reasoning described throughout this piece in your own words, helps reinforce that understanding more deeply than passive reflection alone. Connection with people who see you clearly, who reflect back your worth accurately rather than reinforcing old doubts or unfounded hope, remains one of the most valuable resources available during this process. So does simple patience, permission to have difficult days without treating them as evidence of failed progress, understanding that setbacks and moments of renewed uncertainty are a normal part of any genuine transformation rather than signs that something has gone wrong. None of these practices are mandatory, and everyone's process looks slightly different depending on their own preferences, resources, and circumstances. But it's worth considering, honestly, whether you're offering yourself the kind of care this process actually requires, rather than expecting intellectual clarity alone to do all the work without any accompanying practical support for the emotional dimensions of this process as well. What you'll tell someone else in this position someday. There may come a time further down the road when someone close to you finds themselves navigating this exact same uncertainty, wondering whether they're the one or the option to someone they care about, and it's worth imagining briefly what you might tell them from the vantage point of having already lived through and worked through this exact experience. You'll likely tell them that the evidence matters more than the feelings, that consistent action over time is the only reliable indicator worth trusting. You'll likely tell them that waiting indefinitely rarely produces the conversion they're hoping for, and that their own worth remains completely intact regardless of which category any specific person places them in. Imagining this future conversation can offer a useful, grounding perspective right now, reminding you that the wisdom you'll eventually offer someone else is wisdom you're actively building, right now, through everything you're currently navigating. The truest closing. This piece closes here, having offered everything it can meaningfully offer: a clear distinction, an honest framework for evaluating your own situation, and above all, a consistent redirection back toward the only thing that actually determines your own peace, your own clear, unwavering commitment to your own worth. Whatever happens next, you are equipped for it, carrying forward the clarity, discernment, and self-respect this entire piece has been describing throughout. What remains true no matter what. As this piece nears its conclusion, it's worth restating clearly what remains true regardless of any specific detail about what happens externally, because these truths are the actual foundation this entire piece has been trying to help you build. Your worth remains constant, unaffected by whether any particular person ultimately chooses to treat you as the one or continues treating you as an option. Your standard for genuine, consistent choosing was never unreasonable, and it doesn't require anyone else's validation to remain legitimate. Your capacity to build a genuinely reciprocal relationship remains fully intact, ready to be offered to someone actually capable of meeting it. These truths don't depend on any specific prediction about someone else's eventual behavior or internal readiness. They remain solid and reliable regardless of whatever eventually unfolds, offering you a stable foundation to return to whenever uncertainty, doubt, or difficulty make that foundation harder to access in the moment. Hold these truths close, returning to them repeatedly throughout this process, trusting that their stability will continue to support you through whatever comes next. A word on anger and where it fits. It's worth addressing directly a feeling that sometimes accompanies this recognition, but that this piece hasn't yet fully named. Anger, specifically anger at having spent real time and real energy in the option position. Anger at the accumulated pattern that made this recognition necessary. Anger that might surface alongside the grief and clarity this piece has. Already described, anger is a legitimate, appropriate response to having your patience and hope treated as an indefinitely renewable resource, and it deserves space alongside everything else you're processing right now. Anger held and processed in healthy ways rather than suppressed entirely can actually support the clarity and boundaries this piece has described throughout, offering fuel for holding your standard firmly rather than second-guessing it during moments of doubt. Give yourself permission to feel this anger fully, alongside the grief, the clarity, and the strength this piece has already described, understanding that all of these feelings can coexist and inform each other throughout this entire process. The last word. You reached this recognition because something needed to be seen clearly, and you found within yourself the honesty and courage to finally see it. Whatever comes next, this recognition and everything it has taught you belongs to you permanently, ready to protect and guide you through every future relationship you build, for the rest of a life that remains entirely and completely your own. A closing metaphor worth holding. It can help during this process to hold a specific image in mind, a door that has been left permanently ajar, neither fully open nor fully closed, requiring you to keep checking it, keep wondering which way it's going to swing, keep holding yourself in a kind of readiness that never actually gets to rest. Being the option often feels exactly like standing in front of a door held permanently ajar, unable to fully walk through it and unable to fully close it and move on, caught in a threshold that was never actually built to be lived inside indefinitely. What this piece has ultimately been asking you to do is decide deliberately that you won't live in that threshold forever. Either the door opens fully through someone's genuine, sustained, demonstrated choosing, or you close it yourself and walk toward a door that isn't held ajar at all, one that opens fully and stays open, built by someone genuinely ready to offer you exactly that. Hold this image whenever the pull to keep standing in an unresolved threshold feels strong. You deserve a door that opens fully, and you have every right to walk toward one, rather than continuing to wait indefinitely in front of one that never quite decides. The end of this piece, the beginning of what's next. This piece ends here, but your own process continues, unfolding at its own pace, informed by everything described throughout these pages, but ultimately shaped by your own ongoing choices, your own continued clarity, and your own steady commitment to the standard you've already, through real reflection, determined you deserve. Whatever comes next, remember that your own forward movement, your own healing, and your own worth remain fully within your control, regardless of anything else that happens. Trust yourself, trust the clarity you've built, and move forward steadily into a life built on your own terms, fully and completely your own. What genuine repair would actually require, revisited. It's worth returning once more to the question of genuine repair, should it ever become relevant to your specific situation, adding one further layer of consideration. Genuine repair, in the context of the distinction this piece has been describing throughout, requires not just improved behavior but an actual acknowledgement from the other person of the specific impact their inconsistency has had on you. Without this acknowledgement, even genuinely improved behavior can feel incomplete, missing the recognition that what came before actually caused real difficulty and real cost, not simply an unfortunate but blameless misunderstanding. If you do encounter genuine repair at some point, it's worth noticing whether it includes this specific acknowledgement, alongside the sustained behavioral change this piece has already described. Both elements together, acknowledgement and demonstrated change, offer a more complete picture of genuine repair than either element alone, and holding out for both, rather than settling for one without the other, protects you from accepting an incomplete version of the accountability genuine change actually requires. A reflection on what you've already proven. Regardless of how any specific relationship or situation ultimately resolves, it's worth pausing to recognize what you've already proven, simply through the process of engaging seriously with everything this piece has described. You've proven that you're capable of honest self-reflection, willing to examine your own situation clearly rather than continuing to interpret it through the most comfortable, hopeful lens available. You've proven that you're capable of holding a standard for yourself, understanding that genuine partnership requires consistent choosing rather than accepting whatever level of investment happens to be offered. This proof matters, independent of anything else that happens next. It reflects real growth, real self-respect, and a genuine capacity for the kind of clear-eyed evaluation that will serve you well in every future relationship and every future situation that similarly tests your own judgment and your own worth. Closing. You are worth being someone's clear, consistent choice. Carry this truth forward, complete and unshakable, into everything that comes next, trusting that it belongs to you permanently, regardless of anything else that unfolds from here. A final word on trusting the process ahead. Everything described throughout this piece ultimately asks something significant of you, the willingness to trust a process of honest evaluation and considered action even when the outcome remains genuinely uncertain. This is difficult because most of us prefer decisions made with full information, full certainty about how things will unfold. But this kind of complete certainty isn't available to you right now, and waiting for it before acting on the clarity you've already built would mean waiting indefinitely for something that external circumstances may never actually provide. Trust that you don't need this complete certainty in order to move forward well. You need only the certainty you've already built about your own worth, your own standards, and your own willingness to honor them consistently, regardless of what remains genuinely uncertain about any specific outcome. This is available to you right now, and it's the single most valuable thing you can carry forward from everything this piece has described. What other people in this position have ultimately found. It's worth closing with some final, broadly shared wisdom about what tends to happen over time for people who successfully move through this entire process, holding their standard clearly and acting on the evidence available to them. Many find, eventually, relationships genuinely capable of offering the consistent choosing this piece has described throughout. Relationships that feel, by comparison, remarkably calm and secure, free of the constant uncertainty and interpretation that characterized their previous experience in the option position. Many also find that the clarity and self-respect built through this specific process extends into every other area of their life, informing healthier boundaries at work, in friendships, and in their broader relationship with themselves. This broader, lasting impact is one of the most valuable, hopeful outcomes available from everything this piece has described, worth holding on to as genuine encouragement for whatever comes next in your own particular journey. Truly final words. You deserve to be the one, not the option. Hold this truth close, act on it with real courage, and trust that everything you need to build the life and the relationships you actually deserve is already, through everything you've learned throughout this process, fully within your reach. A note for the days you feel like giving up on this clarity. There will likely be at least one day, maybe several, when everything this piece has described feels genuinely hard to access, when the pull to abandon this clarity entirely, to talk yourself back into hopeful, generous interpretation regardless of the actual evidence, feels stronger than the resolve to hold your own honest assessment. On these specific days, it's worth having a simple, minimal commitment ready, something smaller than the full weight of everything this piece has described. Simply not acting on the old hope today, simply getting through these next 24 hours without reversing course, simply postponing any significant decision until tomorrow, when clearer thinking might be more accessible again. This kind of minimal, day-by-day commitment can carry you through the hardest stretches more effectively than trying to hold the entire, larger picture in mind during moments when that larger picture feels genuinely out of reach. Give yourself permission to shrink the time frame when necessary, focusing only on getting through the next day, rather than requiring yourself to maintain full clarity about the entire process at every single moment. The very last word. You are doing this, one honest assessment, one clear boundary, one moment of choosing your own worth at a time. That is enough, and it will continue to be enough, all the way through to a life built entirely and completely on your own genuine standards. Truly, finally, the end. You are worth being someone's clear and consistent choice. Carry this forward, complete and unshakable, into everything that comes next, trusting fully in your own worth, your own clarity, and your own capacity to build exactly the life and love you deserve. The freedom of an unwritten future. It's worth closing with a reflection on the freedom actually available in not knowing exactly what comes next, a freedom easy to overlook when uncertainty feels primarily like a source of anxiety rather than possibility. An unwritten future means nothing has yet been foreclosed, means the specific shape of your life going forward remains genuinely open, shaped by choices you haven't yet made rather than locked into a single predetermined outcome. This openness, while uncomfortable in its uncertainty, also holds real possibility, room for the kind of genuine, reciprocal partnership this piece has described throughout, waiting to be built by someone genuinely capable of offering it. Rather than experiencing this unwritten quality only as a source of anxious uncertainty, it's worth also holding it, when you can, as a source of genuine possibility, a reminder that the story ahead of you remains yours to write, informed by everything you've learned through this experience but not confined by any single predetermined outcome. What you'll notice a year from now. It's worth imagining, briefly, what you might notice about your own growth a year from wherever you are right now, because that longer view can offer real encouragement during a process that sometimes feels slow while you're inside it. A year from now, you'll likely notice that this specific situation has become simply a chapter in your history, referenced occasionally, but no longer central to how you understand your own worth or your own standards for what genuine partnership requires. You'll notice that the framework this piece has described has become so fully integrated that you barely have to think about it anymore, simply operating from a place of accurate self-understanding without needing to consciously access the reasoning behind it. Let this longer view offer encouragement during whatever stage of this process you're currently in. The destination described throughout this piece is real, reachable, and if you're doing the work this piece has outlined, already underway. Final closing. This is where the piece truly ends. You are worth being chosen fully, consistently, and without ambiguity, and you now carry forward everything you need to recognize that choosing when it arrives, and to walk away with real self-respect from anything less. Gratitude for what this taught you, without gratitude for the difficulty. It's worth closing with an honest distinction between two things that sometimes get conflated in discussions of growth through difficulty. Gratitude for the lessons this experience ultimately taught you, and gratitude for the difficulty itself. You don't have to be grateful that you spent time in the option position, don't have to construct some spiritual narrative where that difficulty was somehow necessary or deserved in order to produce the growth that followed. The difficulty was real and it was genuinely hard, and none of that needs to be reframed as secretly a gift in order for you to also recognize the genuine value of what you learned as a result of moving through it. You can hold both truths simultaneously. This was hard and it shouldn't have had to be this hard, and also, having gone through it, you now carry forward real wisdom, real discernment, and real self-understanding that will serve you well beyond this particular chapter. Neither truth cancels out the other, and you don't need to pretend the difficulty was worth it in some cosmic sense in order to still value what you've built out of surviving it. The simplest truth. If everything else in this piece feels like too much to hold on to, let this simplest truth remain. You deserve to be the one, not the option, and you now know clearly enough what that distinction actually looks like in practice to recognize it. Protect yourself from settling for less and hold out for exactly what you deserve. That's enough. That's genuinely, completely enough. Closing. Thank you for trusting this process and trusting yourself enough to seek this clarity in the first place. Whatever comes next, you are ready, equipped, and already, in every way that matters, moving forward. A final practical checklist. As a closing, practical summary of everything this piece has described, it may help to have a brief, concrete checklist to return to during moments when the broader concepts feel harder to access. Ground yourself in your own written evidence whenever doubt or old hope arises. Evaluate any relationship by its accumulated pattern over meaningful time, not by isolated moments of warmth. Hold a clear, considered standard for what genuine reciprocity actually requires, and resist the urge to renegotiate that standard downward simply because holding it feels difficult. Give yourself permission to feel the full range of emotions this process involves: grief, anger, relief, uncertainty, without judging any of them as wrong. And trust consistently that your own worth remains completely intact regardless of how any specific person ultimately categorizes you. Return to this checklist whenever you need a concrete, practical anchor, understanding that it distills everything this piece has offered into something immediately actionable. What remains when everything else fades? If everything else described throughout this piece eventually fades from active memory, replaced by the ordinary business of a fully lived life, what remains permanently is this. You learned, through real and difficult experience, that you deserve to be chosen fully and consistently, and that settling for anything less, however much genuine warmth might AC. Company it costs more than it's ever actually worth. This understanding doesn't fade. It becomes simply part of who you are, informing every future relationship and every future situation that similarly tests your standards and your worth. Truly final words. You are worth being the one. Carry this forward, complete and unshakable, into a future built on real clarity, real self-respect, and a fully restored sense of exactly what you deserve. What this distinction reveals about timing. It's worth adding one further layer of nuance to everything this piece has described. Sometimes a person genuinely capable of consistent choosing simply isn't ready to offer it at a particular moment in their own life, not because of any deeper capacity gap, but because of circumstances, timing, or their own readiness that has nothing to do with a lack of genuine feeling or genuine potential. This is worth acknowledging honestly, because it complicates the otherwise clean distinction this piece has drawn between being the one and being the option. That said, this nuance doesn't actually change the practical guidance this piece has offered throughout. Whether someone's inconsistency reflects a deeper capacity gap or simply poor timing, the impact on you remains the same, and your own right to expect consistent choosing within a reasonable time frame remains valid regardless of the underlying cause. You are not obligated to wait indefinitely for someone else's timing to eventually align with genuine readiness, regardless of how understandable or sympathetic the reasons behind that misalignment might be. Your own life and your own timeline matter just as much as theirs, and waiting indefinitely for someone else's circumstances to resolve, however sympathetic those circumstances are, still costs you the same real time and real energy this piece has already described. This nuance is worth holding, not as a reason to extend indefinite patience, but simply as a more complete, more compassionate understanding of why someone might occupy the option-giving role without necessarily being a fundamentally uncaring or permanently incapable person. The practical value of a trial period. For situations that feel genuinely ambiguous, where you're not yet certain whether you're witnessing a deeper capacity gap or simply a slower start that might still resolve into something more consistent, it can be useful to set a clear, bounded trial period, rather than either walking away immediately or committing to indefinite, unbounded waiting. This might mean giving a relationship a specific, reasonable time frame, communicated clearly if appropriate, during which you'll be watching specifically for the concrete signs of consistent choosing this piece has already described throughout. Having this bounded trial period, rather than open-ended waiting, offers a useful middle path for situations that don't yet have enough accumulated evidence to definitively categorize. It protects you from either premature judgment based on insufficient information or indefinite patience that never actually resolves into clarity. At the end of this trial period, evaluate honestly what you've actually observed and let that honest evaluation guide your next steps, rather than extending the trial period indefinitely simply because reaching a final conclusion feels uncomfortable. A closing thought on growth in both directions. It's worth closing this section with a reflection on growth that can happen in both directions throughout this entire process. You may grow in your capacity to recognize and honor your own worth, exactly as this piece has described throughout. But it's also possible in some cases for the other person to grow as well, genuinely developing greater capacity for consistent choosing over time, whether within this specific relationship or eventually within a future one. Holding space for this possibility without requiring it or waiting indefinitely for it reflects a balanced, realistic understanding of how people actually change, gradually and sometimes unpredictably, rather than either assuming permanent stasis or assuming inevitable transformation. This balanced view protects you from either excessive cynicism or excessive, indefinite hope, allowing you to hold your own clear standard while still acknowledging the genuine complexity and unpredictability of how people actually grow and change over time. What silence from the other side might mean, held loosely. If after a direct conversation or a clear boundary, the other person responds with silence rather than either genuine engagement or continued deflection, it's worth holding several possible interpretations loosely rather than assuming any single one definitively. Silence might reflect genuine reflection, someone taking real time to consider what's been said before responding thoughtfully. It might reflect discomfort or avoidance, a retreat from a conversation that felt too demanding to engage with directly. It might reflect simply confirmation of the pattern you'd already observed, someone unwilling or unable to engage even when directly asked to. Rather than spending significant energy trying to determine which of these interpretations is accurate, it's worth returning to the practical question this piece has emphasized throughout. What do you need, regardless of what this silence ultimately means? If silence continues for a meaningful period without any follow-up engagement, it's worth treating that continued silence as its own form of evidence, regardless of which underlying interpretation might technically be most accurate. Silence sustained over time functions, practically speaking, very similarly to continued inconsistency, regardless of its underlying cause, and your own next steps can reasonably be guided by this practical reality rather than requiring certainty about the other person's internal experience. The practical wisdom of not over-explaining your standards. It's worth naming directly a pattern that sometimes emerges when people try to communicate their standards for consistent choosing. Over-explaining, offering extensive justification and context for why they deserve consistent treatment, as though the standard itself requires elaborate defense in order to be legitimate. This over-explaining often reflects an underlying uncertainty about whether the standard is actually reasonable, an uncertainty this piece has already worked to address directly throughout. You don't need to over-explain your standard for consistent choosing. It's a reasonable, basic expectation for genuine partnership, and stating it clearly and directly, without extensive justification, tends to communicate more confidence and more clarity than an elaborately defended version of the same basic point. Practice stating your needs and your standards simply and directly, trusting that their validity doesn't actually require extensive defense in order to be real and worth holding. Final reflections on the nature of this distinction. As this piece truly nears its conclusion, it's worth reflecting one final time on why this distinction, between being the one and being the option, matters so significantly. It matters because it offers a practical, evidence-based framework for evaluating relationships that might otherwise remain confusing and difficult to assess clearly, especially when genuine feeling and genuine inconsistency coexist within the same dynamic. This framework doesn't require you to become cynical or overly guarded. It simply requires you to trust consistent action over inconsistent words, evidence over hope, and your own accumulated experience over any single, isolated moment that might otherwise be interpreted more generously than the broader pattern actually warrants. Carry this framework forward as one of the most valuable practical tools available to you from everything this piece has described, ready to protect and inform every future relationship you build going forward. What you're actually building right now. Beyond the specific relationship this piece has been discussing throughout, it's worth naming what you're actually building right now, in a broader sense, through everything you're navigating during this process. You're building a template, an internal model for how you evaluate relationships going forward, one that will inform every future connection and every future situation that similarly tests your patience and your standards. You're building evidence, direct and personal, that you're capable of recognizing an unsustainable pattern and acting on that recognition, evidence that will support your own confidence in future decisions long after this particular chapter has resolved. You're building, too, a clearer sense of your own worth, one that doesn't depend on any single relationship's outcome or on anyone else's eventual recognition of what genuine choosing requires. This sense of worth, built through the difficult work of holding a boundary even amid uncertainty and doubt, becomes a permanent resource, carried forward into everything you do next, informing not just future relationships but your broader relationship with yourself and your own capacity to trust your own judgment. This is the real, lasting outcome of everything you're going through right now, more significant and more durable than whatever specific pattern eventually plays out on the other side of this particular relationship. You are building yourself, right now, in real time, through the accumulated choices this difficult period is asking of you. The relief of no longer needing to categorize in real time. There's a specific relief available once you've built the framework this piece has described throughout, a relief that comes from no longer needing to constantly, anxiously categorize a relationship in real time, wondering moment to moment which category you currently occupy. Instead, you can simply observe, patiently and without excessive anxiety, trusting that the accumulated pattern will reveal itself clearly enough over a reasonable period of time, without requiring your constant, moment-to-moment analysis of every individual interaction. This shift from anxious, constant categorization to patient, evidence-based observation offers genuine relief, freeing up significant mental and emotional energy that might otherwise be consumed by the exhausting project of trying to determine, in every single moment, exactly where you stand. Trust the process of accumulated observation, rather than requiring constant, real-time certainty, understanding that clarity built patiently over time tends to be more reliable than clarity grasped at anxiously in any single isolated moment. Closing. You deserve to be someone's clear and consistent choice. This is the truth this entire piece has been building toward throughout, and it belongs to you now, complete and unshakable, ready to guide every future relationship you build from here forward. A reflection on what friends and family sometimes miss. It's worth naming directly a specific dynamic that sometimes complicates this entire process. Well-meaning friends and family who, upon hearing about your situation, jump quickly to strong opinions in either direction, either insisting the relationship is clearly hopeless and you should leave immediately, or insisting you're overreacting and Hould simply be more patient. Both of these strong, quick reactions, however well-intentioned, can actually undermine the more careful, evidence-based process this piece has been encouraging throughout, pulling you toward a premature conclusion rather than supporting your own patient, honest evaluation. If you notice this happening, it's worth gently redirecting the conversation, letting the people in your life know that what you actually need is support for your own process of honest observation, rather than their own quick conclusion imposed onto your situation from the outside. Most people, once they understand what's actually needed, are glad to adjust the kind of support they're offering, and asking for exactly what you need, patient support for your own evidence-based process rather than someone else's premature verdict, is a reasonable, healthy request. The wisdom you now carry into every future connection. Everything this piece has described adds up to a specific, valuable body of wisdom that you now carry forward into every future relationship. Wisdom that took real difficulty to earn, but that will serve you reliably for the rest of your life. You understand now, in a way many people never fully grasp, that feeling and choosing are different things, that consistent action matters more than any amount of genuine, sincere emotion expressed in isolated moments. You understand what genuine reciprocity actually requires, and you now know to hold out for it rather than settling for less simply because settling has become familiar or comfortable. Carry this wisdom forward with confidence. It is one of the most valuable outcomes of everything you've been through, and it will continue to serve you, quietly and reliably, in every relationship you build from here forward. Final words. You were never meant to be someone's option. You are meant to be chosen, fully and consistently, by someone genuinely capable of matching your own depth of care with their own sustained, demonstrated commitment. Carry this truth forward, complete and unwavering, into everything that comes next. A closing blessing for the road ahead. May you move through whatever comes next with clarity, patience, and genuine self-compassion. May the standard you've built continue to feel solid and worth holding, even during the moments it's tested by doubt or loneliness. May you find, in your own company and in the support of those who genuinely care for you, everything you need to navigate this evaluation fully and honestly. And may you arrive, eventually, at a relationship built on genuine, consistent choosing, one that never again leaves you wondering which category you occupy, because the answer will simply be clear every single day through the ordinary, reliable evidence of how you're actually treated. This is where this piece truly ends, offering you not a prediction about anyone else, but a foundation, one built entirely out of your own clarity, your own standards, and your own capacity to recognize and receive the genuine, consistent choosing you deserve. The difference this understanding makes. Everything described throughout this piece changes, in practical and lasting ways, how you move through every future relationship. You'll notice the early signs of the option pattern more quickly. You'll trust evidence over hope more readily. You'll hold your own standard with less apology and less second-guessing. This is not a smaller or more guarded way of loving. It's a wiser one, protected by real, hard-won understanding, ready to receive the genuine partnership you've always deserved. Truly final closing. You are worth being chosen. Not sometimes, not conditionally, not when it's convenient, but consistently and completely. Carry this forward into everything that comes next, trusting fully in your own worth and your own right to exactly this. A word on patience with uncertainty. Uncertainty, by its nature, is uncomfortable. and it's worth acknowledging directly that no amount of reframing or understanding fully removes that discomfort, only makes it more bearable and more manageable while you move through it. You don't need to achieve a state of complete comfort with uncertainty in order to be healing well. You simply need to develop enough tolerance for it that it doesn't prevent you from continuing to invest in your own honest evaluation and your own forward movement, even while some uncertainty remains genuinely present. This tolerance builds gradually, through repeated practice and repeated exposure to the discomfort itself, without that discomfort needing to fully resolve before you're able to function well despite it. Trust that this tolerance is developing. Even during the moments the underlying uncertainty still feels genuinely uncomfortable, understanding that discomfort tolerated is still meaningful progress. What genuine healing from this recognition actually feels like. It's worth closing with a clear, honest description of what genuine healing from this recognition actually tends to feel like in practice, so you have a realistic sense of what to expect rather than an idealized version that might set you up for unnecessary disappointment. Genuine healing rarely feels dramatic or complete all at once. It feels more often like a gradual lightening, a slow reduction in how much space this specific situation occupies in your daily thoughts, a growing capacity to engage fully with your own life without the old undercurrent of anxious categorization running constantly in the background. It feels eventually like simply living your life, this specific relationship becoming just one part of your broader story rather than its central, defining feature. This is what genuine healing actually looks like, undramatic and gradual, and trusting this realistic picture helps you recognize genuine progress even when it doesn't feel as dramatic or complete as you might have initially expected. Closing. This piece offers its final word here. You are capable, discerning, and already, through everything you've navigated to reach this point, demonstrating exactly the clarity this process requires. Trust yourself, hold your standard, and move forward steadily and completely into a life that belongs fully and entirely to you. A final reflection on what endures. Relationships change, sometimes suddenly and sometimes gradually, sometimes clearly and sometimes ambiguously, and the specific details of how any particular relationship or dynamic evolves tend to matter less over time than what actually endures afterward. Your own character, your own growth, your own continued capacity for love and connection, undiminished. Whatever difficulty you've just moved through, this is what actually persists, long after the specific details of this particular chapter have faded into the broader, ongoing story of your life. Trust that what endures in you, your capacity for genuine love, your growing wisdom about your own standards and your own worth, your resilience through real difficulty, matters far more than any specific outcome this piece has discussed throughout. This enduring core of who you are is what will actually carry you forward, not just through this evaluation, but through everything life continues to present in the years ahead. The simplest truth restated. If everything else in this piece feels like too much to hold on to, let this simplest truth remain. You deserve to be the one, not the option, and holding that standard clearly is never too much to ask. That's enough. That's genuinely, completely enough, and everything else will unfold from there in its own time at its own pace. Closing. Thank you for trusting this process and trusting yourself enough to seek this clarity. Whatever comes next, you are ready, equipped, and already, in every way that matters, moving forward. A note on reading this piece more than once. If this piece resonates with you now, it's worth considering returning to it again, at different points throughout your own process, because different sections may prove more or less relevant depending on where you happen to stand at any given moment. Early on, the sections addressing the general distinction and the practical signs worth noticing might feel most relevant. Later, as you move through evaluation toward action, the sections addressing direct conversation, evaluating responses, and building your own certainty might offer more useful guidance. There's no need to absorb everything this piece offers in a single reading. Let it serve as an ongoing resource, something to return to as needed, rather than something you need to fully internalize immediately in order for it to be useful. Gratitude for your own courage. Before this piece truly ends, it's worth pausing one final time to acknowledge, directly and without qualification, the courage it takes to seek this kind of honest clarity in the first place. Courage doesn't always look dramatic. Often it looks quiet, internal, almost invisible from the outside, simply the accumulated willingness to see a situation clearly rather than through the most comfortable, hopeful lens available. This courage deserves genuine recognition, not just from the people around you, but from yourself, directly and without minimization. You found this courage. You're using it right now in the ongoing, difficult work of building and holding this clarity. Recognize this fully, and let that recognition offer you some of the same strength and support this entire piece has been trying to provide throughout. Closing. You are meeting this recognition with real courage, real clarity, and real self-respect. Whatever comes next, this piece leaves you with a single, final truth. You are already, through everything you've navigated to reach this moment, exactly as strong and exactly as worthy as you need to be for whatever comes ahead. What you owe yourself now. Having done the work this piece has described, having built the honest, evidence-based understanding necessary to recognize which category you actually occupy in any given relationship, it's worth considering directly what you owe yourself now, in the aftermath of everything that led here. You owe yourself patience with a process that takes real time to fully unfold. You owe yourself credit for the courage this clarity required, even on days when it doesn't feel courageous, when it simply feels difficult and uncertain. You owe yourself the same generosity of understanding you would extend to any friend navigating a similarly difficult evaluation, rather than holding yourself to a harsher, less forgiving standard simply because you're the one living through it directly. You also owe yourself genuine investment in your own life going forward, not as a distraction from this difficult period, but as the actual substance of your healing, the redirection of energy that used to go toward managing uncertainty into pursuits, connections, and goals that belong entirely to you. Give yourself all of this deliberately and consistently throughout the days and weeks ahead. You deserve it not because of anything you've proven or achieved, but simply because you are worthy of the same patience, compassion, and investment you would readily offer anyone else navigating a difficult chapter like the one you're moving through right now. The truest ending available. The truest ending available to this piece is not a specific prediction about which category any particular relationship ultimately falls into, because that prediction was never actually available to offer with any real confidence. The truest ending is this: you have built genuine clarity earned through real reflection, and that clarity held steadily and consistently will carry you forward into whatever comes next, regardless of any specific external event. Trust this clarity, trust yourself, and move forward fully and completely into a life shaped by your own steady hand, whole and entirely your own, regardless of anything else that happens from here. What this means for the relationships you build next. Everything described throughout this piece will shape, in valuable ways, whoever comes into your life next, whether as a friend, a partner, or any other significant connection. You'll bring a sharper instinct for recognizing early signs of the option pattern, rather than waiting, as you may have this time, until significant time and investment have already accumulated before addressing it clearly. You'll bring a clearer, more considered sense of what genuine reciprocity actually requires, rather than being persuaded prematurely by gestures that haven't yet demonstrated sustained consistency. This hard-won wisdom will make every future relationship healthier and more sustainable, not because you'll become guarded or distrustful, but because you'll bring genuine discernment alongside genuine openness, protecting yourself from repeating a pattern you now understand clearly enough to recognize much earlier than before. Whoever comes next will be meeting a version of you shaped by this experience, not diminished by it, equipped with real wisdom about your own worth, ready to build something healthier and more genuinely reciprocal than what came before. The practice of returning to yourself. If there's a single practice worth committing to above all others described throughout this piece, it's the practice of returning again and again to yourself, to your own standards, your own values, your own clarity, whenever anything external threatens to pull your attention away from this central anchor. This practice doesn't require perfection. It simply requires the willingness to notice when your attention has drifted toward hope or doubt, and to gently, repeatedly, bring it back home to yourself. This is the real skill underneath everything this piece has described, more valuable than any specific insight about patterns or predictions, because it's the skill that will actually carry you through whatever specific outcome eventually unfolds. Truly final words. You have already done the hardest part. You are worth being the one, not the option, exactly as you are right now. Whatever comes next, you are equipped and you are ready, carrying forward a clarity that belongs permanently and completely to you. What to remember on the hardest days. There will likely be specific days harder than the rest when everything this piece has described feels distant, difficult to access, overshadowed by acute loneliness, doubt, or the old pull toward hopeful reinterpretation. On these hardest days, it's worth having a few simple, clear things to return to, things that don't require extensive reasoning to access, even when your capacity for extensive reasoning feels temporarily diminished. Remember that your standard was never unreasonable. Remember that your worth doesn't depend on this specific relationship's outcome. Remember that healing isn't linear, and a hard day doesn't undo the genuine progress you've already made. Remember, too, that these hardest days do pass, even when they feel in the moment as though they might not. On these hardest days, lean more heavily on your support system, on whatever practices help you feel more grounded, and on simple, basic self-care, understanding that surviving the hardest days is itself a significant, meaningful accomplishment, deserving of real credit even when it doesn't feel like much in the moment. The real gift this experience has given you. Beyond everything specific this piece has described about this particular relationship, the real, lasting gift available from this entire experience is a deeper, more durable relationship with your own judgment, your own standards, and your own worth. You now know from direct experience that you're capable of recognizing an unsustainable pattern and protecting yourself from its continuation. This knowledge becomes a permanent resource, carried forward into every future situation that similarly tests your patience and your sense of your own worth. Final closing. You have found your clarity and you are holding it with real courage and real self-respect. This is enough. Whatever comes next, you are equipped, strengthened, and fully capable of moving forward into a life built entirely on your own terms, whole and completely your own. A closing metaphor worth holding. It can help during this process to hold a specific image in mind. 2 seats at a table, one clearly marked as permanent, the other clearly marked as temporary, available only for as long as convenient and never formally upgraded regardless of how long someone occupies it. Being the option means sitting indefinitely in the temporary seat, hoping that enough time or enough patience will eventually transfer you to the permanent one, when in reality, only the person setting the table can make that determination, and no amount of waiting in the temporary seat actually produces that upgrade on its own. What this piece has ultimately been asking you to consider is whether you're willing to keep sitting in a temporary seat indefinitely, hoping for an upgrade that hasn't yet been offered despite ample time and ample opportunity for it to occur. You deserve a permanent seat, offered freely and without ambiguity, at a table built by someone genuinely ready to seat you there from the beginning. The end of this piece, the beginning of what's next. This piece ends here, but your own process continues, unfolding at its own pace, informed by everything described throughout these pages, but ultimately shaped by your own ongoing choices, your own continued clarity, and your own steady commitment to the standard you deserve. Trust yourself, trust the clarity you've built, and move forward steadily into a life built on your own terms, fully and completely your own. A final word on legacy. Beyond this specific relationship, it's worth naming what this entire experience contributes to the longer arc of who you're becoming, the kind of person who models, for anyone watching, that holding a clear standard for how you deserve to be treated is not unreasonable, but simply healthy self-respect. Every time you demonstrate, through your own lived example, that being someone's clear priority is worth waiting for and worth walking away from anything less to find, you offer something valuable to everyone around you, whether or not they ever explicitly recognize what they're learning from watching you. You don't have to think of this as a mission or a responsibility. It's simply a natural byproduct of living fully inside the clarity this piece has described, a clarity that ripples outward quietly into every relationship you touch. The truest ending available, restated. The truest ending available to this piece was never going to be about what any specific person ultimately decides. It was always going to be about what happens to you, about the clarity you built, the standard you held, the peace you reclaimed, all of it earned through real difficulty, but genuinely, permanently yours now. The very truest closing. You are here now, whole and clear, carrying forward everything this experience taught you into a life that finally, fully belongs to you. That is enough. It was always going to be enough, and it is yours now for good. One last word. Go now and live it fully, quietly, and completely on your own terms, holding the standard you deserve without apology, and trusting that the right person will meet it without you ever having to ask twice. A final practical note on reintroducing trust. At some point well after this evaluation has served its purpose, you may find yourself ready to trust again, fully and openly, in a new relationship, no longer guarded by the old uncertainty, but genuinely open, informed by everything this experience taught you about what to look for and what to expect. This reintroduction of trust, when it happens, tends to feel different from how trust operated before, more selective, more attuned to actual evidence rather than hopeful interpretation, less automatic in its willingness to extend indefinitely regardless of what's actually being offered in return. Notice this shift when it arrives, understanding it as one of the clearest markers that the deeper work of this entire process has genuinely taken hold. Absolutely final words. You reached this clarity because something needed to be seen honestly, and you found within yourself the courage to see it. You will emerge from this process stronger, wiser, and more completely yourself than you were before any of this began. This is enough, and it always was. A note on what you deserve from here forward. Having moved through everything described throughout this piece, it's worth stating plainly and directly what you actually deserve going forward, not as an abstract aspiration, but as a concrete standard worth holding future relationships to. You deserve relationships where being the one isn't something you have to wonder about, where the evidence of your priority status is simply, consistently visible in how you're treated day after day, without requiring extraction or repeated conversation to confirm. You deserve integration, initiative shared equally, and a clarity about the relationship's direction that never leaves you guessing. Hold this standard clearly and without apology as you move forward, trusting that everything you've learned through this experience has equipped you to recognize it, pursue it, and receive it fully when it finally arrives. Watching your own growth unfold. There is something quietly remarkable about watching your own growth unfold in real time throughout a process like this one, noticing, week by week, how much steadier your own judgment has become, how much less the old pull toward hopeful reinterpretation tugs at you, how much more naturally your attention rests in an accurate, evidence-based understanding of your situation. Take time to actually witness this growth as it happens, rather than moving through it so quickly that you miss the chance to fully recognize what you're building. This witnessing matters because it reinforces the growth itself, making it more solid, more integrated, more genuinely yours the more consciously you acknowledge it. The closing word. You sought clarity and you found it. That is the real story here, more significant than anything that did or didn't happen with any specific relationship. Carry it forward whole and complete into everything that comes next. A closing reflection on wholeness. Wholeness in the context of everything this piece has described doesn't mean the absence of difficulty or the complete resolution of every lingering question about a specific relationship. It means being fully present with yourself, fully in possession of your own standards and your own worth, even while some things remain genuinely uncertain. You are whole not because everything has been neatly resolved, but because you no longer require external resolution in order to feel complete. Carry this wholeness forward into whatever comes next, trusting that it will hold, because it was built not on anyone else's response, but on the solid, dependable ground of your own reclaimed clarity and your own restored sense of worth. Final, complete closing. This is where the piece truly ends. You are whole, you are clear. And your willingness to hold this standard with such genuine courage has already given you everything it was ever actually meant to give, yourself fully returned to you, exactly as worthy of being chosen as you always were. A last reflection on trusting what you cannot see. Much of what this piece has described asks you to trust a process you cannot fully see the end of, to hold a clear standard without certainty about whether it will be met, to build peace without needing anyone else's confirmation that your standard was warranted. This kind of trust in the unseen is one of the more demanding forms of faith available to a person, and it's worth acknowledging directly how much genuine courage it requires. You are trusting your own judgment, your own worth, and your own capacity to recognize genuine partnership when it arrives, without the reassurance of a guaranteed outcome, and that trust, sustained day after day, is itself one of the most significant accomplishments available from everything this piece has described. Hold this trust gently but firmly, understanding that it doesn't require certainty in order to be well placed. It requires only your own continued willingness to believe in yourself, exactly as you are, exactly as you've already proven yourself to be throughout this entire process. The genuine final word. You are ready, you have always been ready. And whatever comes next, you will meet it exactly as you are, whole, discerning, and completely worthy of being someone's clear, consistent choice. Closing thought. Take this understanding with you into the rest of your life, not as a burden to carry, but as a lantern that lights the way forward, showing you clearly what deserves your investment and what never should have been allowed to cost you so much of it in the first place. You know now, and knowing, fully and completely, is enough to carry you the rest of the way home. Go now and live it. Go now and live it fully and completely your own, holding your standard clearly and trusting fully that you are worth exactly the consistent, genuine choosing you've spent this entire process learning to recognize and require. The truest, simplest thing. If nothing else from this piece stays with you, let this remain. You are either someone's clear, consistent choice or you're not, and no amount of your own patience or effort can manufacture the former where it doesn't already genuinely exist. This is not a discouraging truth. It's a liberating one because it means you don't have to keep working so hard to earn something that either is or isn't already being freely offered. Trust the evidence, trust yourself, and walk toward the life and the love that actually match what you're worth. Final words, genuinely. You are whole, you are ready. And whatever comes next, you will meet it exactly as you are, strong, clear, and completely your own. A final word on what comes after. There is a particular quality to the life that opens up once this clarity has done its work, once your standards have fully settled into place and your energy has redirected toward relationships genuinely capable of meeting them. It's a life where you no longer wonder quietly and anxiously which category you occupy, because the evidence is simply, consistently clear, one way or the other, without requiring extraction or repeated interpretation. It's a life where your own worth no longer requires confirmation from anyone else's inconsistent behavior in order to feel completely real. This life is available to you now, built out of everything this piece has described, ready to be lived fully and without reservation. Step into it deliberately, trusting that everything you've already done to reach this point has fully prepared you for whatever comes next. Truly, finally, the end. You sought clarity about whether you were the one or the option, and you found something more valuable than either answer alone. A clear, unshakable understanding of exactly what you deserve and exactly how to recognize it when it finally, genuinely arrives. A closing note on discernment as a lifelong practice. The discernment this piece has been helping you build isn't a one-time achievement, fully complete and never requiring further attention. It's a lifelong practice, one you'll continue refining across every relationship you build for the rest of your life, growing sharper and more automatic with each experience that tests it. This is not a burden. It's simply what it means to move through the world as someone who has learned, through real experience, exactly what genuine partnership requires, and who continues applying that learning with increasing skill and increasing ease as time goes on. Trust that this practice will continue to serve you well beyond this specific situation, informing every future relationship, every future friendship, every future professional connection, where the question of genuine priority versus convenient option might similarly arise. The final, complete word. You are worth being chosen fully, consistently, and without ambiguity. This truth doesn't depend on any specific relationship, any specific person, or any specific outcome. It belongs to you permanently, built out of your own worth, your own clarity, and your own hard-won understanding of exactly what you deserve. Carry it forward into everything that comes next and trust that it will guide you well for the rest of your life. A final thought on the word, either. It's worth reflecting briefly on the specific word this piece's title uses, either, and what it implies about the nature of this distinction. Either suggests a binary, a clean division between two categories with nothing meaningfully in between. In practice, as this piece has acknowledged throughout, relationships can sometimes occupy more ambiguous territory, at least temporarily, before the evidence accumulates clearly enough to settle into one category or the other. But the binary framing still holds real value because it resists the temptation to let ambiguity become a permanent, comfortable resting place, requiring instead that you keep evaluating honestly until the evidence does settle clearly, one way or the other. Hold this binary as an aspiration for clarity, a reminder that permanent ambiguity is rarely actually neutral, but tends, over time, to function as a kind of answer in itself, one worth taking seriously rather than allowing to continue indefinitely without resolution. The absolute final word. You deserve to know, clearly and without ongoing ambiguity, exactly which category you occupy in any relationship you're investing in, and you deserve, above all, to be the one. Carry this forward, complete and unwavering, into everything that comes next. Closing line. Whatever category any specific relationship ultimately falls into, your own worth was never actually the variable in question. It was always constant, complete, and entirely deserving of consistent, genuine choosing. Carry this forward now and always into a life that reflects exactly that truth. Final note. May you walk forward from here with clarity, patience, and a full, unwavering trust in your own worth, regardless of anything else that ever happens next. This is enough. It was always going to be enough, and it is yours now and always. You are whole. You are ready. And whatever comes next, you will meet it exactly as you are, strong, clear, and completely your own. This is where the story of this evaluation closes and where the story of everything ahead of you, entirely unwritten and entirely yours, truly begins. Go forward now steadily and build it well. You are more than ready for what comes next, and you always have been. A closing word. Whatever their next move turns out to be, it was never going to be the thing that determined your worth. Your worth was always going to come from here, from the moment you finally trusted yourself enough to say, I deserve to be the one, and meant it. You've already said it. You're already living inside that truth. That is the real ending to this story, and it belongs completely and permanently to you. You are ready for whatever comes next, and you always were. Go now and live it fully. This is enough. It was always going to be enough. A final word on recognizing the feeling of being chosen. There's a specific, unmistakable feeling that comes with genuinely being chosen, one worth naming clearly so you know exactly what to trust when you finally encounter it. It feels like ease rather than effort, like your presence in someone's life is simply assumed rather than continually negotiated. It feels like exhaling, a settling in your body that comes from no longer needing to interpret, manage, or wonder. When this feeling arrives, genuinely and consistently, trust it. It will be different from anything the option position ever offered you, and that difference will be exactly the confirmation you've been building the discernment to recognize throughout this entire process. You are whole, you are steady, and you are already moving forward. Carry it well. You are ready, truly the last word. You are whole, you are protected, you are at last entirely your own. That is the truest ending this story could ever have, and it is yours now and always, regardless of anything else that happens next. Go now and live it fully and without hesitation. The rest of your life is waiting, unshadowed and entirely open, ready for you to walk into it exactly as you are. Nothing more needs to be said. The work is done, and it was worth every bit of what it took. You are ready, you are whole entirely and completely now and always. Carry it well into everything that comes next. You are ready now and always for exactly the life you deserve.